The conversation about today is very much about um, content strategy, and that enables or engages a few things. It talks about engagement of learners that good content strategy enables, but it's also about course portfolio management, the productization of your course portfolio, I usually call it. And that also means that it's about operational costs and making sure that you're quicker to market. So there are quite a lot of things enabled and uh, influenced by a good content strategy for training providers. I'd like to welcome again our special guests. Jenny, can I start with you? I introduced you as a special guest. I can see behind you that you are part of Echo 360. Jenny, what does Echo 360 do? What do you do there, and how does that relate to training providers?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jan. Yeah, I'm Jenny Gordon. I'm currently heading up the growth for the EMEA and APAC regions for Echo 360, which is an organization that provides learning tools and platforms to government, higher education, further education, schools, to training providers in a very different forms, depending on what their current need is, how they want to deliver their learning, how they want to deliver their content, how they want to deliver their assessment, that sort of thing. I've been in the learning tech industry for more years than I want to tell you. But I've had the joy of working with lots of different organizations who deliver different types of content to different types of learners at different times within their learning processes. And my role at Echo kind of brings that together. It allows me to continue working within the learning tech space and with content providers and designers and deliverers, but across a range of different countries and to a range of different organizations as well. So that's a little bit about us.
Thank you very much, Jenny. You did say different countries. We just heard from Stan, who is in Belgium, and we heard also from is it Niam, who's in Dublin. Do you serve customers in those countries?
We sure do. Yeah, absolutely. We've got
Okay.
customers throughout the UK and Ireland, and throughout Central Europe, right through Scandinavia. Actually, Echo is a global organization, so we're market leader of some things down as far down as New Zealand, and have a large corporate organization within the US as well. So we're a global organization serving lots of people everywhere.
All right. All right. Thanks for the overview. Gary, can I go to you as our special guest as well? What is your role and how do you relate to training providers?
Yeah, thanks, Jana. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, my role is as Chief Product Officer of Maybo, or as I sometimes feel, it's Chief Persuasion Officer rather than Product Officer. And my background in training, a bit like Jenny, I've been involved in all things training and learning and development for longer than I like. I'm only 26, really, although I don't look it. But a long
Same,
time.
Gary, same.
And over the years, and certainly in my role now, and Maybo within Maybo, we really focus around helping organisations and teams and individuals to interact with others who may be displaying behaviours that challenge or behaviours of concern, conflict or violence in the workplace. So it's about helping them interact with others with empathy, with dignity, respect, and to keep safe. So our training is all around helping organisations ultimately achieve positive and safer outcomes across the business and deliver their services in the best way that they can. And sometimes, these situations, depending on the organisations we work with, and we work across NHS, mental health services, transport, any services where there is interaction with people, that's where we specialize. And I think what I really like about what you said, Jenny, it's about the journey. It's when we often, I think, going back in my early days in learning and development, everything was all about the course, the one-off event. And we know that life is a learning journey, and learning in all forms of life, including the business of training. If we see it as a collective journey, people don't often wake up and go, I want to do some training today. It's often we want to be able to do something different that we couldn't do before. And I think it's looking at the entire system, how we access learning that's more accessible, that actually helps people do something differently or better than they could before. And I think my role really is about taking all of those pieces and helping create a solid foundation and a content strategy that productizes the knowledge that often lives in people's heads. And as trainers, I've been a trainer and I've been a designer and all those things. So much of what we're trying to help people with sits in individuals' heads. And unless we can extract that and bottle the gold, which is the productization, often that learning gets lost as people move on.
Right. Bottling the gold. Here's our first statement that we're going to remember. There's another part that you just mentioned, which is around the training being a journey. I always talk about there are actually three phases, I think, which is inspiration, which is get off the couch and do the training, being motivated to do so. The training itself, which is a learning experience that needs to be as impactful as possible. And that's where kind of most trainers frame most of their work. And then, of course, after the training, there is or maybe in many cases, part of the training is the application of that training. What you learn here, you apply there. And I think that whole process, inspire, learn, apply, is part of a training business where they can make a difference. And so it for many, it kind of widens the scope, if you like, or enlarges the scope. Anyway, I'll come off that soapbox. Let's talk about that content strategy part. Jenny, can I start with you? Multi-modal content strategy. So not just one piece of content like something to read or video or something, but multimodal. How does Echo 360 work on that? But how does that? Why is that so important for training providers to use multimodal content?
I think there's a few different things here. I mean, recently, and Jan, we spent some time last week at the same conference, 2 weeks ago at the same conference. We talked about this a bit. First of all, that's relevance of the type of content. I think, we've got a marketplace that is quite busy and quite full. I think expectations of learners, whatever phase they're at, is also growing. And so we need to ensure that the relevance of the content is really important. But also the way in which our learners are consuming content is changing as well. Gone are the days where an e-learning course is enough. But I think this is driven by a couple of different things. Firstly, that the training that our trainees are taking isn't just about kind of compliance anymore. I think often we're asking for more competence-based and understanding of how we're putting the knowledge into practice. So what Gary was saying around, the application of the training is becoming more and more important. We're not just looking to tick boxes in many of the different industries in which we work, whether it be in education, whether it be corporate. It's more than just compliance. It's more than saying, I know the knowledge. It's about, okay, how do we apply it? And when you're asking that question, then we say, well, it's not just about following something on screen, reading something on screen, looking. It's about sort of interacting with content in a different way. So that assessors of content or assessors of the learning can also see how that learner is applying things. And that combined with the introduction of AI and a greater expectation from everybody around the world that things need to look much better and sound much better and need to be available much more quickly compounds the need for the production of that content to be just more applicable, more relevant, more interactive, because we're seeing that at our fingertips as consumers of everyday content that isn't necessarily aligned with training and outcomes. So I think it's like a perfect storm at the minute, isn't it? We're expecting an awful lot of our providers. Our learners' expectations have increased. Margins, by the way, are decreasing all the time, but producing content potentially is more cost effective because of AI. So I think there's just this general kind of circle around multimodal being at the center of what we're thinking about when we're producing anything. And I think that cuts across all the different sectors that we've talked about that we work in, whether that be somebody producing content in a school, in a higher education institution, in a learning provider, or in a corporate L&D situation as well.
Right. Yeah, thank you. And can only agree with the why the multimodal part is there, of course. As actually Rod Farnworth just put it in the chat as making training sticky, and I think that the multimodal part where we're talking about is playing a role in that. But Gary, what is your take on this?
Yeah, I think with all of these things, with all, there's so many areas so many lenses we could look at, training and development, learning, behavior change, because ultimately, I think depending on the type of business you are, and if you're, if we're a training business focused on meeting qualification based stuff, we're often just told what the content is, and we have to abide by that. So it becomes an academic framework. But for many businesses who are in the business of training, for the commercial aspect, and it's often about behavior change. And I think, as I was saying before, I don't think there's any companies out there that wake up in the morning and go, what we must do today is get some training for our client, our staff. We want to spend money on training. I don't believe that's the case. I think there's normally a business need, there's an outcome that we're seeking to. And I think when we focus very heavily on let's create more content, there's content everywhere in the world today. And I think it's about distilling that content down into what is it that's going to help staff do something different that they couldn't do before. And a couple of little phrases that I often use, is in order to do something different, we have to do something different. Otherwise, we do the same. So I think
I love that comment.
I do too. That's great.
Having this multimodal approach to learning generally, which is why I tend to not talk. Although we use the concept of content because it's overarchingly understood, it's about what's the learning experience and the outcome we want. What is it we want people to do differently? And the point you touched on, Jenny, is what do we get people to practice? If it's whether it be from CPR to manual handling to interacting with people with a background or a poor mental health, or with trauma histories, or with learning disabilities. It's what do we want them to do that they're not doing now, and how do we get them to do that? If we could do that without training, would we do it? Quite possibly. So I think it's looking at how we can provide our learning experiences in different ways that achieve the outcomes that a business is looking for, is beneficial for the learner who's consuming the content or consuming the experience, and that is of value to them. We often get very content heavy, knowledge heavy. How much of what we want people to do relies on what they need to know, and that's the question I throw out there for everybody really. When we deliver a training course and we spend a lot of time telling them information, how much of that is useful in their day-to-day jobs?
That's a good question. Can we just put that in the group? Gary, you talked about how much content is really necessary. Is that how we would frame that?
Yeah, so quite often we'll say, oh, they need to know these things, and whether it be a policy, a document, a framework, a piece of legislation. So, I mean, if you take first aid at work, for example, if somebody needs to be able to do CPR, what do they need to be able to do? Well, they need to be able to do CPR. Well, that's what they need to be able to do. How much of the Resource Council guidelines do they really need to know in order to do that? I'd argue very little. But yet still in many, I've not done first aid training for some time now, but there's still an awful lot of knowledge-based stuff that we spend time, which not saying it's not important, but there are possibly different ways that we can provide that that information by making better strategic use of any in-person time to focus on practical application, the stuff that you talked about, Jan, which I completely align with. It's how do we inspire and motivate people to go, actually, I want to do something. And then from there, how do we get them to apply that information or those practice elements into transfer to the workplace?
Nice one. Thank you for that. I see in the chat that people are responding as well. Louise, are you okay to talk a little bit about this and how content strategy helps you in your training business?
We come across quite a few hurdles, but we're a resilience development company, so we deal with all change management, taking people from good to great, and that sort of thing. We often find that people contact us when it's too late. They don't want to put into their people, but we have modules. There's 8 of them. They've all got a different topic. It's all around just the people side of everything. But what we do is we've taken vast knowledge, loads and loads of information, made it very simple, and every single one of them is a skill so that they can go out and use it straight away, easily transferable, use on themselves, use on their team, and so push it forward that way. So the content side of it is fabulous. You know, it sort of goes all through it, but it's just getting people over that mindset that it's not a one-off. This has got to change into culture, and it only changes into culture and if you get it into habit, if it's actually a common language, if it's always being used. I think it was Rod that put up, and I sort of I so agree, Rod. You know, a huge knowledge dump versus I can't get my chat function to work now. What is it the learner needs to be able to do? So yeah, that's the sort of approach that we take. But yeah, we have a lot of trouble sometimes with people. We go, it's an 8-week program, and they're like, we're time poor. It's not usually money, which is really weird. It's we're time poor, and we're like, yeah, that's why we're coming in. But yeah, you've got to spend the time.
I think that also, Louise, when you said, you know, it's something you build in, it's a culture. And I think going back to your point, Gary, around people don't just want to wake up and do some training. I think actually, if you build it in as a cultural ongoing development piece, I think people do look to sometimes come in and say, what sort of training can I do? How can I apply what I've learned? I think the cultural piece is really fundamental.
I don't know if anybody else finds though, we have a lot of companies that come to us and specifically for culture change. Okay, we'd like to change our culture. We'd like to do it in a 2-hour one-off session. And we're not sending a senior leadership team on it either. And you're just like, oh, it's like banging your head against the wall. But yeah.
Well, that's the evangelization role that we also play, of course. And apology, Gary, for interrupting there. I did want to take this to another, I think, related point, which is, and I'm going to actually ask Louise first. The fact that you have a lot of different types of organizations that are your customers probably, and they come kind of in hindsight, training is a good thing attitude. Does that mean that a lot of your customers are asking you to customize your training for their specific sector, role, business?
They can ask, they won't get it.
Well, this is
So ours is
a
a little bit
this as a bridge.
because we just changed the content. We got the content, we got everything there. Just change how we deliver it. So we have delivered into the National Health Service, from large banking. Obviously, I'm in a finance island, so we do a lot of that. We've done it in education. We do it everywhere. I mean, I've taught this from 6-year-olds through to CEO, Exec Suite, everything all the way in between. And the program doesn't change. How we deliver it is the thing that changes. But that's because we're very much people-based, we're people side. And like what Gary was saying earlier on, you know, if someone needs to know CPR, they need to know those skills. Ours is a little bit different. So we don't adapt it really. That's the biggest challenge we have, that companies will come and they go, we'd like it on a 1 hour off the, you know, and we go, can't be done. Can't be done. You're going to have to invest the time.
So taking that point on customers might ask for a different version, whatever that means, customized, and versus we have a one size fits all, but we can deliver it in a different way. Gary, you and I had a brilliant conversation, 2 weeks ago, that you made a really good point on how to customize and productize that content. Could you tell us more about that? How Maybo does that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. When we look at the different sectors that we work in, we work across all different sectors, and then within those sectors, there's multiple different roles. And when we take organizations and we break all of the programs down, you can have a new program for every client, for every organization who wants it slightly differently, or they have slightly different needs or perceived needs. But actually, when you actually look broadly across it, as we were talking about, Jan, much of the outcomes they're looking for are often very similar and they're the same. So much like when you order a bespoke kitchen unit and you get your bespoke kitchen fitted, it's never really bespoke. They haven't made that for you. They've made it out of modular units that they bolt together, and you can choose your worktop. And that's kind of what we do in Maybo. So we've got a modular architecture in our curriculum that, depending on what the outcomes the organisation is wanting to meet, we can then customize a program from our modular architecture. We also then have sectorization variations of resources, but they're built around a core framework. And what that allows us to do is make sure that when they have their program, it feels and seems like it's for them, but it is built around a core curriculum. And that means that we build once, deliver to many, rather than build once, deliver to one, build again, deliver to another one. And what that allows us to do then is to collate feedback across all the sectors and identify the patterns of feedback, and then we can productize and develop iteratively to improve the product for the entire market rather than just one client. And we've had it, as you, Jenny, we've had issues where a client wants to completely change a program. They want it done in 1 hour, not 3. And that becomes very resource heavy. And of course, it can be done. And some businesses are geared up to do that. And that is what they do. They will design and produce training programs on demand. But they're not a scalable and consistent approach, because it's build once, deliver, and the project finishes. Whereas I think what I'm hearing, particularly here, is that everyone is about improving that product.
Thank you. Jenny, what's your view on how reusing content can enable different delivery methods or help that productization?
Well, I think it's really just an extension of what Gary was saying. I remember in another life, in another business, we did a lot of content building for UNICEF, and we're delivering it at scale. It was about medication, AIDS medication in an African context, delivering it at scale with UNICEF. It was a very different life, but same kind of, same theme. And because of the way that funding worked in that area, there was an amount of funding to create an amount of content, and you finished creating that and delivered it, and you finished creating it. And our position always was, but when just because that funding's ended doesn't mean that we have to, it doesn't mean you stop either creating content and delivering it to those particular people in the field. And certainly medication changes, policy changes, there needs to be an ongoing consideration of how we continue to adapt that, how we keep the maintenance of that relevant. It's fundamental to the health and well-being of the people ultimately that it was being delivered to. So when you think about kind of that extreme kind of process of funding ended, that finished, everything that I've done since then in my kind of, with my different hats on, has been around looking at scale, what we can create once and use many times. To Gary's point, the kitchen modular system is actually use that analogy myself, in the sense that it can be bespoke to a point, but the building blocks are much the same. what is relevant for one organization might be slightly different for another. That comes down to the culture and everything else. So I think when it comes to kind of the reusing it, yes, you're looking at kind of lower development costs, which are really important when you're thinking about scales and margining, that sort of thing. Fewer instructional design hours and everything that comes along with that, less SME time, things that are potentially much more expensive. So the ability to get things out to more people at a greater scale, is improved. Maintenance costs and things like that can be reduced as well. But I think as well, if we're looking at back to the human side of it, back to the people side of it, if we really want to put our kind of if we want to invest in the right things, how can we improve instructor efficacy or efficiency by reusing things and saving, if you like, in the reuse of some of the content and pushing funding into areas that really matter. So that face-to-face time, time where we might actually be watching or observing learners or trainees doing something rather than marking or assessing online. So I think there's loads of advantages around the kind of the savings that you can get from the reuse. But what we do with that saving is probably a better question, if you like.
That's an intriguing question. What do we do with the savings? Do we put it in marketing? Do we make it more efficient? Create room for investment. My mantra is always innovate. So
Yeah.
the budget you just gave me, I'll put it into innovation.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk a bit more about content strategy with from a different angle. Are there any pitfalls to this? Is this something that we have to watch out for to make sure that content strategy really works? Gary, any specific examples where something went wrong, maybe, or not had the outcome that you expected from it, and is there something there?
Yeah, there's a couple of little points I think I from experience I've seen, and it can be difficult to come back from. And again, I'll leave you with a little soundbite is to fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Because quite often especially SMEs, when we work with SMEs, they go, oh, this is a really good piece of content, and we get into content, and this is a good load of information, and how we do all this, and you sort of get excited by that and go, oh yeah, that's a really great idea. That's a really great idea, but you lose sight of what the outcome is and what the parameters are. As an example, if you've got a 3-hour program and then, an SME says, oh, we need to enhance this area of content and we'll create this video or we'll create this exercise. And back to time, which I think somebody mentioned earlier on. I don't know, was it Louise or Jenny? I'm not sure. But again, I often use time is the currency we trade in learning and development. And it is time for learning that we're often short on. And if you develop this whole big explanation and more content, well, something has to give. You have to take something out. And sometimes we forget actually what's the outcome we're trying to achieve. And scaling it back is sometimes more preferable than adding more content.
That's a good point on scaling back and content. I noticed that one of the jobs that when we help training providers design and create a course, for example, transforming it from an instructor-led to a digital or blended environment. The second part of that job is, okay, and now cut out everything that you don't really need.
Yeah.
And there is an emotional problem with that because I'm really proud of this part. And is that something you recognize?
Hugely, and there are two. I don't like saying competing priorities, but sometimes they're beneficial. Sometimes there are things that we go, actually, we have to make sure that people have seen this or know this or have been presented with this. But when which could be like terms and conditions, is a learning course the right place to give somebody a whole list of policies, or is there another place for that? And quite often we run away with the content. and it just grows and grows. Yeah, I'm just thinking about examples of, when you work with, how do you take out content from a program that an SME feels is absolutely essential because they're the SME. So if you ask a paramedic to teach you CPR, or a doctor, will you get something very different than if you ask me? And which one would be better? What's the right level?
It's a great example. It's got to do with the level. It's got to do what the SME is, what the SME knows, because you're also, as a subject matter expert, we tend to share, whether you like it or not, the things I know. Okay.
And that's part of the challenge. Because when you and what you were saying, Jan, is when you speak to an SME, they'll say everything is important, but everything can't be important because we've only got 2 hours. So what's the most important things for these learners to achieve the outcome that we're looking to achieve? And I think the SME, as SMEs, we can fall into the trap of trying to make our learners the same level of SME as we are.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for that. I've seen in the chat some great contributions also from Dominic and Rod. Dominic, you have a good point on the expertise can sometimes lead to complacency. Do you want to voice your opinion on that? Do you have the option to
Yeah, sure.
share your
I've
microphone?
unmuted.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jan. Yeah, I was just reading last night, actually, one of my favorite authors, and I'm sure some of you know about him, Robin Sharma, The Everyday Hero Manifesto. And the chapter I picked up, because all his chapters are nice and short, is that actually to be world class, to be brilliant at something, we need to know what to cut out. We need to know what is the essential. Was it Leonardo da Vinci? He said um, something along the lines of, you know, it. It'll come back to me in a minute. But anyway, basically, to be optimized, to be the best, you have to know what to cut. You have to know. It's like, how did you sculpt David Michelangelo? I took away everything that wasn't David. So just knowing what to leave is absolutely essential, I think, to being world class at what you do. And that is an expertise that we need to keep going towards. Just like an author, or rather an editor of a book, they need to know what to cut in order to make it the best book it can be. Because anyone can make a really long film, anyone can make a really good, or not good, but really long business plan. But actually, who's going to read it? Probably not very many people. So actually, it's about simplifying. That's it. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. That's the
That one.
nice pithy way of saying it.
Nice one. By the way, could you put the writer you just mentioned, could you put it in the chat for other people to maybe have a look as well? Thank you for that. I'm going to go back to Jenny. Thanks, Dominic, for your contribution. Jenny, I'm also looking at the time. We only have a few minutes left. What have you seen any particular good examples of content strategy, maybe from other customers, or in your experience in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. We work with a couple of awarding organisations who obviously sit on the side of identifying those outcomes alongside the awards levels. And actually, one of our key partners, and Jan, you met them last week, the Skills and Education Group, they both sit on the AO side and on the delivery side. So they're working with multiple organisations that are responsible for looking at the relevant content, seeing who's consuming that content, being quite close to it, and then also having an eye, not with the same calls, obviously, but also having an eye as to what's most relevant for that type of audience or that type of qualification. I'm thinking security training, doormen. Okay, so this is a hugely popular qualification that a lot of that is delivered at, I think, just through Skills and Education Group alone, around 600 centres nationally. And the different levels that trainees are coming in at to start in those qualifications is wildly different. I think everything from English proficiency level to the background of these people coming onto these courses. But the compliance standard of these deliveries have got to be very, very consistent. And the way in which they have to be assessed and observed has got to be very, very consistent. But the way in which the individual centres are delivering them can be nuanced depending on the specific audiences. I think in that case, they have really been able to say they've been able to give enough variety or enough movement in how to deliver to accommodate for the different audiences while still meeting the objectives and still meeting the compliance frameworks for that particular award. I mean, you think it's something simple to deliver doorman training at scale when you have such a vast array of different people coming into those courses. The delivery in itself needs to have some sort of flexibility. But I say all this because a lot of it also comes down to Gary's point earlier, the way in which it's delivered and the capacity of those people that are delivering it to be flexible and to be able to change how they deliver things while still meeting the same objectives and the same outcomes at scale. So I think that the content strategy is fundamental, as is the assessment methodology, by the way. But also kudos to the people that are still responsible for delivering these things, because their ability to be flexible and to accommodate the different needs of the learners and the trainees at the point of need is still, we say content is king, but that is still, to me, what's most important.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. If content is king, is then context the queen? So we're nearing the end of our conversation, and what a brilliant conversation this is. Thank you. I'm going to ask you one last question. I'm gonna, Jenny, as we're talking, ask you first. What is your advice for training companies to start work on a good content strategy? What is the one thing they should start with?
Gosh, the one thing, you put me on the spot. I think there's actually a really good discussion going on here in the chat. And being from an organization that provides a tool that is all about reflection, I'm going to ping on to this. And to the point that Dominic made is, and to Gary as well, everything that we want to put in is really important. Deciding what to leave out is equally important, but making time for that reflection. How have I understood that? How have I understood it to be delivered both in this context and the broader context? Can I implement this piece of learning in the real world outside of my training? So that reflection piece is fundamental in that design process. And that reflection piece can be done in such a range of multi different ways now. I can watch myself do something, I can listen to myself do something, I can read back. And I think building that in is a really fundamental part of the future.
Excellent. Thank you. Gary, what is your advice for companies to start work on a good content strategy?
I think I'll sum it up just with find the gold and bottle it. It's what is the real gold in your organization in terms of the knowledge and the learning points that you're trying to make. And if the gold is covered in mud and all sorts of extraneous content, get rid of it. Back to the Michelangelo analogy, try and make your content and your learning experience as impactful, as inspiring as possible by applying all of the principles of good learning that we all know and love so well. All the principles behind making content memorable, concise, and contextualized.
Nice one. Thank you so much. Indeed, bottling. Why do I stick with bottles today? Thank you all so much. Gary, Jenny, great conversation. And not just Gary and Jenny, also all the participants that contributed or just learned today. Thank you all for attending, for being here. What we will offer you is a free one-to-one productization review. If that's of interest to you, and by the way, we'll ask you a few questions as feedback on this webinar, because we're always trying to improve. Remember my mantra, always innovate. Well, that also means always improving. Please scan this QR code. We will ask you 5 questions, and we will ask you as a 6th question, would you like to have a free one-to-one productization review. Thank you again. If you want to see more of Echo 360, come to either the accelerator program, come to the conference. You can meet them in person. Gary, thank you so much. By the way, talking about the conference, I know that people can meet you at the conference as well, isn't it?
They can. I will be at the conference. So yeah, feel free to come say hello. And if anybody on today wants to pick up a conversation or wants to carry on a conversation around productization of learning, product thinking in learning and development, feel free to let me know. Just drop me a message.
Thank you. Jenny, Gary, rest of our fantastic audience. Goodbye. See you at the next webinar.
Thanks everyone.
Great to meet you all.
Bye bye.